All right, so today we're going to talk about 2.1 rational numbers. This is part 2. We're going to do the opposite of what we did on part 1, and we're going to write the decimals as fractions, which you may or may not be used to. So let's go ahead and look at the first problem. It's always important to remember that any decimal that you have, it's always going to be put over 100. Now, there's a couple good things and bad things to remember with that. So for example, this one here, if we know our place values, we know that this is the tenths and this is the hundredths. Okay? However, if we go to like problem number 2, we've got tenths, hundredths, and then thousandths. Now, since that goes all the way to the thousandths place, we would put the number over 1,000. And if we could go further, the 10,000th, the 100,000th place. Whatever place value it goes to, that's what you're going to put the number over. So let me go ahead and erase that, and then we'll start with the first problem. Like I said, the first problem, it goes to the hundredths place. Okay, so you're remembering that whatever the top number is, no matter what, it's going to be 100 on the bottom because it only goes over tenths, hundredths, okay? So then you just put the number on the top that's behind the decimal. So 65 over 100. Now the next part you want to look at, since we're now doing rational numbers, positive or negative, we're going to want to see, oh, there's a negative sign, so we want to carry that with us. And then you're going to do just like any other fraction, you're going to go ahead and reduce it. So you think in your head, what can you reduce both 65 and 100 by? Well, I fortunately know that this one can be divided by 5. So if I divide 65 divided by 5, I get 13, and it's still negative. We got to carry that negative with us. And then 100 divided by 5 is 20. 13 is prime, so it's negative 13 over 20. Okay, so now let's go ahead and look at the next one. So the first thing, every single time that you have these decimals, the first thing that you have to figure out is what number has to go on the bottom. So we have to look at the place value. This is where your place value is super, super important. So here's the tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So whatever it is, we're going to put 1,000 on the bottom, okay? And then we look, and it's now 0.32. The 0 technically doesn't count right now, but it would be a big deal if we took it out of the number and made it just 0.32. It's totally different, okay? But it doesn't count. We don't have to put it here, like 0.32, but you can, okay? I'm not going to put it there because it's going to confuse me. So, negative 32 over 1,000. And then you have to see what you can divide by. Now, sometimes if you really can't figure out what you can divide it by, you're going to have to kind of do a guess and check, okay? Or you go by a lower number. Like these are both even numbers, so I definitely know I can divide it by 2, okay? But since I have a lot of experience, I know that I can divide them both by 4, okay? So we go ahead and we do negative 32 divided by 4, negative 8, and then we do 1,000 divided by 4, 250. So see, I was still wrong. There's still another number we can divide it by because these are both even, so I know 2 at least goes in. I wonder if 4 goes in. So I'm going to think in my head 250 divided by 4, and that doesn't go in right. So I guess I could just do it divided by 2 more. So I'm going to divide by 2, divide by 2, and I get negative 4 over, and 250 divided by 2, 125. You might want to check my math on that, but I'm pretty sure. So, and actually I found out So if this doesn't confuse you more, divided by 4 and divided by 2, if I multiply those together, I get 8. I could have multiplied this number by 8, and I would have gotten the correct answer to begin with. Okay? All right, let's go ahead and we can look at number 3. All right, so looking at the next number, cool news, it's still a positive number, but more cool news, there's a whole number there. I never, ever, ever, ever do anything with the whole number, okay? So I ignore this guy for now. We'll bring him back later. So here he is. The 24 is what we need to pay attention to, the 0.24, the numbers after the decimal. So we know it's 2 places, tenths, hundredths. So I'm going to do 24 over 100 equals. And then we're going to go ahead and we are going to do the division. So if I want to divide them both, I'm going to start by dividing them by 4. So 24 divided by 4 is 6, and 100 divided by 4, is 25. Well, I know 6 and 25, they don't have anything common, no common factors. So now the 1 comes back from the dead, and we add that to what we did. So our answer now is going to be 1 and 6/25, and it's positive because it does not say that it's negative, and we leave it like that. Awesome. Okay, so now that you've kind of had an idea of what we're doing, I want you to try the next few, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put the answers up there for you guys, okay? So go ahead and try them. Do not use a calculator because remember in class we are not using calculators, okay? All right. Okay, so I'm hoping the first one didn't confuse you too much because remember, we have to count the place value. So it's not the tenths or hundredths, but it's the thousandths. So that's why we put negative 125 over 1,000. But then I knew, you might not have, you might have done it by 5 or by 25, but I knew that both of those numbers were divisible by 125. So I did that and I got negative 1 over 8. If you took more steps to get negative 1 over 8, that's fine. But ultimately, no matter what steps or what you divided by first, your end result should be negative 1 over 8. The second one is much easier because it only goes to the tenths place. So you can do 2 over 10. Divide those both by 2 and you get 1/5. Okay? Great job. All right, and then on number 6, the next thing that I did was I took that 875. Again, I put that over 1,000 because we're not the tenths, the hundredths, but the thousands place. Great. I ignored that negative 32, but now that I'm done with the fraction, I'm going to bring it back. Negative 32 and 7/8. Great job. Okay, and that's what you guys should have too. You cannot forget to put that negative 32 down there because if you don't, you are 32 off of your answer, okay? All right, great work. Now we're going to order the rational numbers. Literally what you're doing is you're going to do this based on whether they're fractions or decimals. You need to turn them all into the same thing. That's just exactly how I do it, and I always have. I prefer to turn them into decimals only because if you turn them into fractions, so write this down somewhere on your paper. If you turn to fractions, you have to find common denominator. I'm just going to put CD, common denominator. That's important because that's a whole extra step. So why not take these two fractions and just turn them into decimals and then compare the decimals? So that's the first thing I want you to do. I want you to turn those two fractions into decimals, okay? All right, I'm going to do that too. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about, remember, when we are doing these fractions, it's inside out. So that's how I did my 1 divided by 5 down here, and then I got that it should have been 0.2. The other one, negative 1/2, you guys should just know 1/2 is negative 0.5. You should just automatically know that. The next thing I want you to do is put them in order. The negatives, remember, the higher the negative number, the lower it is, so negatives, and then the higher the positive number, the higher of a number it is. So go ahead and put those in order. Oh, and I apologize, it does not say what to order them from. Let's do least to greatest, okay? Okay, so I went ahead and I ordered them. Here's my answer right here, okay? So the very smallest number is negative 0.5. The next smallest is negative 0.25. Now remember before we talked about money, we could always add a 0 here. We could add as many zeros as we want, but we can add a 0 to make it similar to this number so that they're both in the hundredths place and it's easier to compare. And previously we talked about owing money. Well, in this case, I would owe a quarter, and in this case, I would owe 50 cents. I would much rather owe that quarter, okay? So you should have had the same answer that I did. So here's the next one, 1/10, 2/10, and 3/10. Great job. All right, so go ahead and order this one the same way. I'm going to write them as decimals first, so decimals. I'm going to write them all as decimals, and then I'm going to order them, okay? Go. Okay, the first thing I want to go over are the decimals. So 5/2 is the first one that I did, and that turned into 2.5. Negative 7/8 turned into negative, so here it is, negative 0.875, and negative 6/5 turned into 1.2. Now, I might take a look at what has the most zeros. So this one, or what has the most numbers behind it, and it has 3 numbers behind the decimal. I might just look at all the numbers with 3 numbers behind the decimal. So like, for example, negative 1.6, I'm going to add 2 zeros to it, just so that I can compare them better, okay? And go ahead and you do that too. Okay, so this is what all the numbers look like with the same number of numbers behind the decimal. Now we're going to go ahead and order them again from least to greatest. So go ahead and do that. And here we go. That's what you get when you order them from least to greatest. All right, great job. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And you're going to order these from least to greatest. I'm not going to work through it with you. I'm going to go ahead and put the answer up in the end. Okay, so there's the order from least to greatest. And I also added one more step. I went and put them back into the original form, kind of like we talked about when we were doing absolute value of integers. So make sure that you put them back in the original form, like I did. The only one that I thought might be a little tricky was here with the repeating decimal, because remember that 0.5 repeating has infinite numbers of 5. So even if we looked at these 2 decimals, that's like 55 cents, whereas this would just be like 50 cents, okay? All right, let's go on to the next slide. All right, you're going to compare these numbers the same way that we just did the ordering numbers. This one here, if I were you, I would turn it into a decimal. And then I would turn both of these into decimals, or maybe try to turn this one into a mixed fraction and see what that looks like. So go ahead and do that and see if what you get compares to what I get, all right? Okay, and if you got what I got, remember before we talked about the bigger the negative number, the smaller it is. So that would be, this one here would be bigger. That's the one that the alligator wants to eat. Okay. Also, we should have talked about this in class yesterday. Anytime that you have something with 11 as the denominator, you take the numerator, times it by 9. So 2 times 9 is 18. That's what's behind the decimal, and it repeats. So I know that 18 or 0.18 is smaller than negative 4.2. So then that's the one that's going to get eaten because it's a negative number. And then the last one, I went ahead and took my own advice and I turned it into a mixed fraction, and I got that those were equal. Okay? The very last thing I want you to do is I want you to work through this word problem on your own, okay? And then tomorrow we will start class with this problem. But make sure that you have an idea of how to do it, or if you don't have an idea, have an understanding and be able to ask questions about it. All right? Have a good night. I'll see you guys tomorrow.